The reason you sympathized with Bruce Banner is the same reason the system never saw the Hulk clearly. Sympathy is not neutral, it is a filter. And filters do not just soften what you see, they decide what you are allowed to see. For 60 years, that filter was doing a very specific job. It kept the Hulk coded as consequence. It kept the horror at arm's length. It made an unkillable, uncontrollable force of destruction feel like a tragedy you could root for. That is not accidental framing. That is structural design. Then one writer looked at that filter and asked what it was actually hiding. What he found should have been obvious. What he found was not a new story. It was the one that had always been there. The classic Hulk mythology was built on a very specific contract. Bruce Banner absorbs punishment. The world punishes him through radiation, through violence, through institutional betrayal, and the Hulk is the consequence. He is reactive. He is predictable in his unpredictability. The military chases him. The Avengers contain him. S.H.I.E.L.D. monitors him. And underneath all of it runs one shared assumption. The Hulk is manageable because he is finite. That assumption was never tested. It was just agreed upon. And that agreement held enormous structural weight. It allowed the Marvel Universe to treat Bruce Banner as a tragedy instead of a threat. It allowed other heroes to stand beside him at Avengers assembly tables without confronting what they were actually standing beside. It allowed readers to root for him because every story ended with Bruce surviving. Bruised, alone, but surviving. The mythology needed the Hulk to be mortal in function, even if not in fact. It needed him to wear out, to deplete, to eventually stop. And everyone inside the story and outside it needed to believe that. That was the myth. And the sympathy was the mechanism that made the myth feel like truth. Immortal Hulk did not introduce a new villain. It reclassified the existing one. When Ewing established that Bruce Banner dies and resurrects, that the Hulk emerges at night not as a response to emotional stress, but as something with agency and memory and a specific kind of hunger, the institutional framework that the Marvel Universe had built over 60 years collapsed in concept, even where it held in practice. This is where the architecture stops holding weight. Consider what that reclassification actually means structurally. Every program designed to neutralize the Hulk was built on attrition logic. Enough force, enough containment, enough time, and the threat reduces. Immortal Hulk invalidates that entirely. You cannot win a war of attrition against something that cannot be attrit. The Hulk is not a condition to be managed. He is a permanent structural feature of existence. Some would argue this is just escalation. Comics escalate. Every character gets a power upgrade eventually. That reading misses what Ewing actually did. He did not make the Hulk stronger. He made him categorically different. There is a meaningful distinction between a hero who is very hard to kill and a horror figure who simply does not stay dead. One is a power fantasy. The other is a violation of the rules that made power fantasies safe to consume in the first place. That violation does not stay inside the story. The villains in Immortal Hulk did not fail because they were weaker. They failed because their entire strategic model assumed a world where death was the endpoint. Once that assumption breaks, everything downstream of it breaks with it. Institutional response, containment doctrine, heroic sacrifice, all of it was designed around finality. Remove finality and you do not have a stronger enemy. You have an enemy the system has no language for, and systems that lose their language do not adapt. They collapse. Here is what the classic Hulk model could not survive intellectually. It depended on Bruce Banner being the victim. Bruce needed to be sympathetic. He needed to be the man wronged by gamma radiation, by his father, by a military-industrial apparatus that turned his pain into a weapon program. That sympathy was the load-bearing wall of the entire mythology. It kept the Hulk coded as consequence rather than perpetrator. It kept the horror at arm's length. Immortal Hulk dismantles that framing surgically. The Immortal Hulk, the Devil Hulk, the entity that surfaces in darkness, does not present itself as Bruce's defense mechanism. It presents itself as something older, something that was there before the gamma bomb, waiting for a host. The radiation did not create the Hulk. It opened a door that was already in Bruce Banner's psychology. That is a different kind of origin, and a much more uncomfortable one. That recontextualization is not just a story beat. It is a structural shift in how trauma functions in the narrative. The classic model said, Bruce was hurt and the Hulk is the wound. The Ewing model says, Bruce was a specific kind of broken that the Hulk required to exist. The wound did not create the entity. The entity was drawn to the wound. That is not a more powerful origin. It is a more disturbing one, because it means Bruce's victimhood, which was the moral anchor of 60 years of storytelling, was also the access point for something that was never entirely on his side. The thing that protected him was also the thing that let it in. The psychological violence of that proposition is quiet. It does not announce itself, but once you see it, you cannot interpret the earlier material the same way. The consequences inside the canon are precise. The Avengers lose standing. Not in the sense of a team falling apart, but in the sense of a premise failing. If the Hulk is genuinely unkillable, genuinely post-human in a theological rather than biological sense, then the Avengers were never his handlers. They were people he tolerated. There is a difference. One implies authority, the other implies patience, and patience is not the same as compliance. It only looks that way from outside. Characters like General Ross, who spent decades embodying the institutional effort to contain the Hulk, are revealed not as antagonists in an ongoing conflict, but as figures who were already irrelevant. Ross believed in attrition logic. Attrition logic is now structurally void. More significantly, the symbol changes. The classic Hulk was a symbol of repressed emotion. Green skin, torn purple pants, the visual grammar of the outsider. He was legible. He was a metaphor that hurt but communicated. You knew what he meant. The immortal Hulk is not a metaphor. He is a fact. He is a figure that the universe has to accommodate rather than interpret. That shift from symbol to presence is what separates the horror register from the superhero register. Symbols can be managed with counter-narratives. Presences cannot. Once something stops being a symbol, no narrative can contain it. The old architecture cannot fully return because the question has been asked and answered in the text. The Hulk was never safe. The safety was always a story the Marvel Universe told itself to keep operating normally. That story has been read aloud. It cannot be unread. The easy interpretation is that immortal Hulk made the Hulk too dark. That Ewing took a character who worked as an accessible emotional vessel and turned him into something that alienated the core mythology. Hold that interpretation. Examine what it assumes. It assumes the classic Hulk was stable. It assumes the foundation was sound and someone chose to destabilize it. That assumption is the same one the Marvel Universe made. Look where it led. Look at the original design again. A man who cannot control his transformation, who destroys infrastructure, injures bystanders, and cannot be neutralized by any system the heroes construct around him. A being whose continued existence requires everyone who knows about him to maintain a specific kind of selective ignorance about what he actually is. That is not a stable character. That is a character the universe chose to frame as stable because the alternative was too structurally uncomfortable. Ewing did not break the Hulk. He looked at what the Hulk had always been and stopped agreeing to look away. The horror was not introduced in 2018. The horror was acknowledged. And that distinction between the moment a system breaks and the moment observers stop pretending it was not already broken is the actual subject of every serious analysis of institutional failure. The question is not whether the Hulk is too dark for Marvel. The question is whether Marvel was ever honest about what it was holding. The classic smasher was a release valve. Contained, predictable, finite. The immortal Hulk revealed what was always underneath, something that does not deplete, does not bargain, and does not require your permission to return. 60 years of institutional architecture was not dismantled by a creative choice. It was exposed by one. The system did not break when Ewing wrote the first issue. It was always broken. Someone finally stopped looking away.